So ILIG is the International Library and Information Group of CILIP. We're one of CILIP's many special interest groups. If you are a member of CILIP, when you're joining at the end of the year, you can choose your special interest groups, and it's now I encourage you to sign up and join us. We're not like many of the other special interest groups where we link directly to professional areas of interest or expertise or skills. We're librarianship at its broadest, whereby we're supporting and building networks within the international community. So our interest is global. We support colleagues from around the world. In a couple of months' time, coinciding with CILIP's Umbrella Conference, we have a librarian coming over from Vietnam who is on the Anthony Thompson Scholarship Award. He'll be over for a study visit for 3 weeks. Our next informal following on from Vietnam is we have the speaker in the room at the back. I'll point him out. We've got George there who's going to be speaking about America. So our topics will vary from Africa, from Southeast Asia, from across the globe. We very much like to embrace all sorts of librarianship. If you don't know anything about ILIG, please pick up one of these leaflets. This gives you the brief overview. And there's 3 copies of our journal Focus, which provides an insight into some of the areas of international librarianship, and also if you have something you want to share, if you feel like penning an article for Focus, the editor is always happy to hear from you to include articles within here. There are flyers as well of, it's not a new area we're working on, it's something we're revamping. It's called the Hosts Directory. Now, the Host Directory was originally a working between ILIG and the Career Development Group, whereby librarians in the UK would host overseas visitors for short periods of time. We're looking at making it global, so it's not just going to be librarians from the UK hosting overseas visitors, but we're also going to try and incorporate overseas librarians hosting UK visitors. So I'm going to be promoting this quite a bit. If you do have a spare bed, a bit of floor space, or you know someone who does, tell them about the Host Directory. I'm going to be plaguing the lists on Twitter and Facebook fairly soon about that. But you haven't come here to talk to me, to listen to me. You've come here to listen to Jan. I have a very brief overview. She's come from Melbourne to join us today, or you're staying in Bedford at the moment.
Yeah.
A little bit.
So don't all book your bed in Melbourne, at the same time.
Yes, I will be trying to get Jan to sign up. I've not been to Australia yet. So Jan is the director of Murray Consulting and Training Pty Limited. She has been a member of the CILIP and the Library Association. I'm going to embarrass you, for longer than I've been alive.
Yeah, we'll keep it at that.
So a long-standing member. And she's here to talk to us about her experience working with library development initiatives in Vietnam in the late noughties and between 2005 and 2009. She's going to give an overview of issues affecting librarianship in Vietnam and some of the issues in Southeast Asia. So I will pass it over to you, and you can speak for as long as you like. You can keep it as formal or informal as you like. It's entirely up to you. So if we can just welcome her with a quick round of applause.
Well, thank you very much, Doug. And I had sort of planned to make this fairly informal because I did hear that it was an informal session. And it's very nice to be here at CILIP because, living all that way away, although you can tell from my accent I'm actually a Nottingham girl. It's very nice to actually be here at CILIP headquarters and having the chance to meet a few colleagues from the UK. I'm going to talk about, as Doug said, my experience in Vietnam up till about 2009, which is about the last time I was there. I certainly don't claim to be an expert on Vietnam. A lot of people, a lot of information professionals are working in Vietnam from Australia, New Zealand and from the United States in particular. And you'll see the reasons why as I start to talk about that. Probably some of you have been to Vietnam on holiday so you're familiar with the country. Interesting country. I thought afterwards I probably should have put up a map. Long, thin country, very, very hot in the south, very cold in the north. really two quite different cultures, and I've worked in both the south and the north. But for those of you who've visited, particularly if you've visited recently, you'll know that it's a country that is probably developing economically at the fastest rate of all the developing countries, and technology is really taking a very important part in that. So all sorts of things are happening, like most Vietnamese have never had a landline, but they've now all got mobile phones. So there's been lots of jumps in the uptake of technology. And, you know, I'll say a little bit about that later on when I start getting on to sort of the library situation. So what I'm going to talk about is very much based on my own observations in having worked there on various training projects off and on for about 5 years. And also in 2008, I was doing some teaching in Hanoi, and I actually interviewed all the participants of the training course that I was running, because they were all very young people who were working in the National Library of Vietnam, in regional universities, in school. One was from a school library, and they were just entering the profession. So I interviewed them to find out what they thought were the issues that were going to affect library development in Vietnam over the next decade, what sort of things they thought were hampering development, and, you know, where they saw things going in the future. And also, I also did some interviews with some Vietnamese library managers in Ho Chi Minh City. And that was also coupled with a literature review, and my colleague Bernadette Walsh and I actually wrote a paper based on all that, which you can read if you want to. It's been published in Library Management. So I'm drawing quite a bit on some of that today. One of the reasons that Bernadette and I decided to sort of carry our work in Vietnam a little bit further by trying to do a bit of research is that when we ran our first training program in Can Tho, which is in the south of Vietnam, in 2005, as all trainers and you know, library educators do, we tried to find out what was happening in the current library scene to see what sort of gaps we needed to fill in the training. And we just couldn't find anything published about what was going on, certainly not in English. And so this is why we thought, well, we'll perhaps draw some information together so that at least we can publish something that people can draw on, you know, in the future. So that was the reasoning behind that anyway. Okay, well, please stop me at any time if you want to, because this is informal, and I can take questions at the end as well. Doesn't like that. Just a little bit about my background. I've been a library manager in the UK and in Australia. Loughborough Library School was my background many years ago. I've been involved in library education in one way or the other for about 25 years, and it really is my passion. And I've also, for the last 15 years, been a library consultant. I have my own consulting company, and I do you know, library reviews. I do a lot of training and all that sort of thing. And I've been involved in international development perhaps over the last 10 years or so, particularly in Samoa and then in Vietnam. But Vietnam is my probably most recent experience, and I thought that would probably be what you would be most interested in today. I got involved in Vietnam because RMIT University in Melbourne is a university where I was for a long time an academic, and RMIT has worked progressively with an American charitable organisation called United Philanthropy. Anyway, I got it somewhere right. RMIT first went into Vietnam in 2001 and opened up their own campus in Ho Chi Minh City. But then they became involved in the development of 4 learning resource centres in 4 regional universities in Vietnam. And this was through Atlantic Philanthropies, which is the American charitable organisation. And the idea was to try and get some library development and things happening in universities outside of the main cities. So for those of you who know Vietnam, these learning resource centres are in Hue, Da Nang, Can Tho, and you may not have heard of Tai Nguyen, which is a big industrial town north of Hanoi, which is definitely not on the tourist route. They were the places where the LRCs were developed, and I was involved in running training for the staff of the LRCs in Can Tho and Tai Nguyen. And later on, I also was one of a team of 2 people who went to Hanoi and actually ran a diploma in, it was a graduate diploma in educational leadership and information management. And it was targeted at new young library professionals in Vietnam. And the idea was to give them a bit of education background, but also with some information management subjects, so that they would be well equipped to get into leading the field in Vietnam as far as university libraries were concerned. So these learning resource centres really had a great impact on the university library sector in Vietnam. I don't know if any of you who went to Vietnam did the busman's holiday thing and went to look at some libraries while you were there. No? This was the original library in Tai Nguyen University when I arrived there to run training for the staff. And they were very keen on their training, a great group of young people. But as you can see, basic metal shelving, lots of books really thrown on the shelves, quite a lot of them donations, which is another one of my favourite topics in terms of international library development, which I'll get on to later. So really, these young people, although they were very, very keen, didn't really understand what a real library would look like. So we had, a big job ahead of us. But they were all very keen. Every university that was involved in the programme had a brand new library building, and the new library, just to show you, that's the exterior of the Tai Nguyen Learning Resource Centre, and I'm there with all my students. That was taken, I went back to visit them long after the training happened, because it was interesting when we were doing the training, because I was sort of doing it, there was no library to speak of to use to show them how things would work. So it was quite a challenge, really. And they were very proud of their new library when they had it. And this just gives you an idea of what the interior was like. So as you can see, they went from, really a room with some metal shelving and books to actually running a library which would look like a very nice, up-to-date university library to any of us here. So that's just to give you an idea of the impact that those learning resource centre projects had. Because what happened, and I'll say a bit more about this later on, is that those 4 universities that had those learning resource centres have become quite influential in the university library sector in Vietnam. If you like, they're sort of like showcase libraries, which is exactly, what was intended. So I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. I just want to sort of set the scene in terms of library development in Vietnam for you, to show how it's developed, until the stage that we're at now. Library development in Vietnam has been very much, of course, related to its background and history, and particularly its colonial past, when of course it was a French colony. And in those times there were some public, academic and special libraries developed, but of course all the collections were in French at that time. Then of course, after the 1954 partition, when North and South Vietnam were separated, the Soviet Union partnership with North Vietnam led to, first of all, collections being in Russian, and also to the use of the BBK classification, which is the Russian classification system. which I knew nothing about when I went to Vietnam, but fortunately one of the universities I teach in Melbourne has the campus librarian was Russian, so she was able to give us all the information about that. You become very resourceful when you get involved in these projects, and I know quite a few of you have been involved in international projects, so you know exactly what I'm talking about, and I'm hoping you won't ask me what BBK is, because I don't speak Russian. And of course in South Vietnam they had DDC, so you can see that already you've got a problem, because you've got the south of the country which is using DDC, still leaning more towards the French side of things, and in the north, of course, Russian and Russian classification systems. And it's really very interesting when you're in Vietnam. When I was running training, I was always working with interpreters, and one of my interpreters who I became really good friends with, she had early in her career been sent to university in Russia, learnt Russian, come back to Vietnam, and now she finished up, having to learn English. So, there are people there who have these amazing language skills because they've gone through dealing with all these different foreign governments and so on. So even before the war, and by that I mean what the Vietnamese call the American War and what we call the Vietnamese War, the North Vietnamese government was planning to improve libraries, and then of course nothing really happened. But by the late 1990s, this had again become a focus, and there was an increase in public libraries in Vietnam of about 25% between 1975 and 1997. So that's just the background on libraries. And then I'll just say something about library and information science education. So there's always been some education for the library and information profession in Vietnam from the 1930s. And following reunification, ILS education was offered at diploma, bachelor and master's degree level, if you like, on paper. What actually really happened is that, as far as we can deduce, most of the library and information science education programs that were run in Vietnam until very recently were really only at about the level of what in Australia we call the library technician's qualification, which is absolutely nothing wrong with, of course, or what until recently here was called the library assistant certificate. So, there wasn't a great deal of management in there. It was all very practical, and there were all sorts of problems because the people who were teaching those courses, and I'm not in any way criticising them, it's just one of those facts of life, really had very little knowledge of what was happening in information management in the modern world. They had a lack of resources to be able to have time to try and develop the curriculum. So, in fact, they were not producing graduates who were really going to be able to further libraries in Vietnam with the knowledge that they were coming out with. And that was one reason why there was a focus on LIS education in those LRC projects that RMIT University has been involved with. And apart from RMIT, there have been two other universities that have been very involved in those projects, and they're the University of Wellington in New Zealand and Simmons College in Boston, which I'm sure some of you would know as being a very prestigious library school. So, this is the time for change, I guess, and that's what I'm sort of going to talk about now. There are some fledgling professional organisations in Vietnam. A library club was formed in Ho Chi Minh City in 1998, and that's mainly made up of librarians from academic and special libraries in Ho Chi Minh City. And they have focused on trying to get an improvement in the library and information science education curriculum, particularly in the Faculty of Library and Information Science at Saigon University. So, the professionals there are very aware that there is a need for there to be good library and information science programs that are actually being run in the country by Vietnamese library educators, and that's what they're aiming for. The Library Journal of Vietnam was first published in 2005, which is another good step forward. And in 2006, the Vietnamese Library Association was formed. So the profession is beginning to become more formalised. And we all know that that means that then there are avenues for other things to happen. I'll say a little bit about what's been happening as far as ICT is concerned, which we all know is very important for library development. Before 2007, there was a lack of infrastructure and no adherence to national and international standards in terms of cataloguing and classification and all that sort of thing. It's probably mainly because there's a lack of professional librarians there who have an understanding of what all that means in terms of developing national systems. So, for example, there was no national union catalogue, but the government has allocated now some money to be used to develop a library management system for the National Library and also for provincial libraries. So in public libraries, the pattern of provision is that the National Library is actually the head of the network for all the different public libraries. So in the big provincial cities, like for example Hanoi, Hue, Da Nang, there will be a provincial library, and then that sort of manages the next level of public libraries underneath that. So that's really good news, because they will actually have an automated library system. And there's also going to be some electronic reading rooms provided for provincial libraries. So the situation as far as provincial libraries are concerned in 2007 was that about 75% of them did have a LAN, an internet access. About 33% had a multimedia room with internet and email services. 15% had an OPAC, and about 23% do have access to full text online or CD-ROM material. So, although some things are happening, there's still quite a long way to go. And the good thing about the implementation of the library management system that is being funded by the government is that most libraries chose a system called CMC, which is a system that has been developed locally in Vietnam. And that's the one that the National Library chose. So that is really good, because it means that there'll be a standardisation of systems across the National Library and the provincial libraries. And if you go and have a look at the National Library of Vietnam website, they really are working very hard to provide support to information professionals in the country. They've started to work on some national library standards, and they've put up some cataloguing tools, and they've got access to WorldCat and those sorts of things. So the National Library of Vietnam is really working very hard now to get, if you like, get things moving in the country. And one of the things that, I was saying before about how technology has jumped in Vietnam. So what the National Library has been focusing on is one of the problems is that a lot of the printed materials that they do have are in English. They don't have a lot of printed materials in Vietnamese. They have problems getting printed materials into the country because of government restrictions on importation of books, of printed materials that are not in Vietnamese. So although the Vietnamese government is certainly being very progressive, it still is a communist country, and they do have regulations. When I was working at Cantor University, for example, the library had been given a donation of a collection by an American who lived in Vietnam, and it actually, as donations go, it was quite a good collection, but it contained a lot of books about the American War and about the political situation. And the librarians at Cantor University were actually very embarrassed, because they knew they would not be allowed to put those books on the shelves. So, you know, those are some of the problems that they have in terms of censorship and restrictions that, you know, we in Western countries don't have to worry about most of the time. So what the National Library has done, of course, is gone straight to electronic. So what they've done is they've been working on, I forgot to move my slide on, sorry. Sorry, I have to keep doing this. It seems to be the only way that the equipment will respond. So the National Library of Vietnam has started a huge digitisation project so that they can at least make all the materials that they have available in print available across the whole country. So up to date, up to now they've digitised about 6,000 PhD theses. And now they're starting to work on some of the books and maps that they have in their print collection. There's also a digitisation project which is being run by a group called CONSUL, which is the Congress of Southeast Asian Librarians. And the National Library has contributed some legal deposit titles to that. And then there's also a project called VALIS, which is Valorisation de l'écrit en Asie du Sud-Est. And of course, that's French language materials, and that is funded by the French government. And again, it's digital materials. And although you know, it's good to have those French language materials, the gap is still most definitely in having materials available in Vietnamese. And one of the things that we were looking at all the time we were running the training projects was trying to give our trainees some Vietnamese materials to work with. And we encouraged them to do things like, although as a library educator, I do not really like to promote Wikipedia, we actually did encourage them to put entries on Wikipedia in Vietnamese. So at least there was some sort of reference tool there which was available in Vietnamese. Because the problem for information professionals in Vietnam is that they're having to use all the time databases and other information resources that are in English. So unless their English is really good, what they can do professionally is very limited in terms of helping people. And of course, the customer base is increasingly using English, but you know, you can see that it is a problem. So these digitisation projects are, you know, the quick way to get materials in Vietnamese available for the population. There have been quite a lot of cooperative ventures starting up as well. There is a Vietnam Library Consortium, which is led by NACHESTID, which is the National Centre for Science and Technology Information Documentation, and that is a Vietnamese organisation which is based in the Central Library for Science and Technology in Ho Chi Minh City, I think. I can check that. And there has been a lot of cooperative collection development between university libraries in Hanoi. In Vietnam, the universities there are several universities in each main city, but they each have a subject specialisation. So instead of there being one university in Hanoi which teaches everything, there's one university for science and technology, there's one university for the arts, and so on and so forth. So when I say university libraries in Hanoi, that's what's happening. There are several different universities, and they are trying to do some cooperative collection development. And then there's the DDC project, which has been going for some time and being supported by the United States, which is, of course, to translate DDC into Vietnamese. But it's had a few ups and downs, but I think that they have now actually published the Vietnamese version of DDC, and I think they had a few copyright problems, but I'm not a cataloguer, so I can only talk about these things from, you know, what I've been told about. I haven't actually been involved in it. And another thing that the National Library has been doing is working with publishers to introduce ISBNs and CIP data, which again will help in terms of getting National Union catalogues set up and so on. And there's also a Vietnam Journals online database, which is starting up, which will be terrific, actually. Okay. I'll just say a little bit about the different library sectors, what we've managed to find out about different things, and I feel as though I'm getting no questions, so if you get sick of listening to me, please just say something. University libraries. Some are still closed access. So you'll go into a university in Vietnam and there'll be a huge reading room, everybody's sitting there very quietly, and they'll go and check the card catalogue and then go up and ask for the book that they want and bring it back to their desk and read it. This is why the LRC projects were so important, because what we wanted to do and what the government wanted to happen was for there to be a trigger to start the idea of having student-centred learning, and obviously open access libraries and so on. Most of the university libraries are connected through an online network called ILIG, which stands for the Online Library Community Network, whereby university libraries can share materials